Right, thank you, everybody. Welcome to the homelessness webinar that we're running. My name is Henry Ormond. I'm the Chief Executive of Heart of Bucks, and I'll be your host for the next hour. So without further ado, then let's get started. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. And we have firstly, Emily Barker, who is the Homelessness Strategy Officer at Buckinghamshire Council, who will be talking about the Housing First project and its impact on Buckinghamshire. Next up, we have Anna Glover, who's a trustee at Youth Concern, and Emma Dewey, project manager of the Next Step project, also at Youth Concern, talking about youth homelessness in the county and their experiences of working there in that space with the Youth Concern charity. And finally, we have James Boultbee, who is the joint CEO of both Aylesbury Homeless Action Group and Wycombe Homeless Connection, giving us sort of an overview of the picture of homelessness in the county and the preventative work being done. So Daniel, if you wouldn't mind taking down the intro slide, please. And we will get started. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Emily, from Buckinghamshire Council. Would you like to, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about the Housing First project and the impact it's had in Buckinghamshire. The Housing First project's been funded in Bucks for the last 3 years by the Rough Sleepers Initiative and via the Department of Levelling Up. And it's for our most complex clients across the area. I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual funding bid itself. Because it's important, I think, to try and get a picture of what we were thinking of when we tried to ask for such a provision. And I'm going to talk generally about Housing First, and I'll talk then about the specific projects that we run across Bucks. The objective of the RSI funding bid, which is a bit of a lengthy process, as I'm sure anyone who applies for funding will be fully aware, it's to identify for any interventions you want to build, grow and improve over the 3 years. So we were doing 2022 to 2025, which does mean, of course, that it's going to be coming up again soon. It asks you to consider your current rough sleeping provision and make an assessment of its strengths and any service gaps. So this will then inform the design of your future service pathway. It ought to consider objectives for prevention, that being activities to stop people sleeping rough for the first time, intervention, which would be supporting those who are currently rough sleeping to move off the street, recovery, so we're looking at support for those who've slept rough already to ensure they don't return to the streets, and system support, so systems and structures that you embed change and monitor progress. So we completed a service provision analysis and we looked at, whilst there were a number of really positive interventions for prevention and intervention in Bucks. For example, we have a really good established partnership between charities, statutory services and the council. And that's for rough sleepers. We have regular core groups to discuss those rough sleeping, and we have an outreach service that has close links to all relevant services. That's all really positive. And I know that when I moved to another service area some time ago, it was something that we really missed. I was constantly saying we do need this in London because this was something that worked really well. But you can always identify gaps in provision. So we know that there are always gaps for specialist services, for young people, for women. We were lacking proper integration between health and social care and homelessness. We're always looking at what's missing as well as what we do really, really well. But one of the big ones for us was a lack of permanent settled options for former rough sleepers with designated levels of support. It was a lack of provision for those with higher risks and complex needs who would benefit from living in dispersed accommodation. Now, these are people for whom I guess the majority of the options within Buckinghamshire have been tried. So they may have been in supported accommodation before. In fact, they may have been in all of them. They may have had tenancies before and they may have struggled with that. They may have tried to live in a number of different areas. And what we were seeing, that even when former rough sleepers were assisted into suitable accommodation on the housing register, for example, the tenancies, even with the tenancy support that we were able to put in, were not successful. And those individuals ended up losing their accommodation for one reason or another, sometimes rent arrears, for example, sometimes antisocial behaviour, and then returning through the system again. Now, within Buckinghamshire, the Housing First model wasn't available as a comprehensive pathway for recovery. The elements were developing, but we really needed a clear policy in the local area. So part of our RSI bid requested funding support for specific staff members. We asked for funding for extra support for perhaps the ability to put furniture in the properties, the ability to support in lots of other ways so that the tenancies would be successful. And for that, we really were looking for a model of housing first. So what I'm going to do here is just briefly, I'm not sure how much people know about this, but I will briefly explain what Housing First provides. It provides flexible support for the individual for as long as it's needed. And this means support providers commit to long-term offers of support. They don't have a fixed end date. As we know, that recovery takes time and it varies by individual need, by characteristics and by experiences. And this links in with relevant services across sectors that help to meet the full range of an individual's need. It focuses on the right to a home and access to housing as quickly as practical. The housing provided is based on suitability for that person, so stability, choice, affordability, quality, and the ability to integrate into the community rather than the type of housing. And the individual is given their own tenancy agreement in line with the provider requirements. There's support available to help people maintain this tenancy and to address any other needs that they identify. The housing is not conditional on them engaging with that support, and that bit is crucial. The choices they make about the support do not affect their housing. The offer stays with the person, and even if the tenancy fails, the individual is supported to acquire and maintain a new home. The support staff are responsible for proactively engaging their clients, making the service fit the individual instead of trying to make the individual fit the service. Caseloads are small and allow staff to be proactive in their approach, and they won't give up or close the case when the engagement is low. And support is provided for as long as each client requires it and in the way that they require it. So that means the support's pretty holistic. They support individuals who use substances to reduce and prevent ongoing harm to their health. Staff aim to support individuals who self-harm to undertake practices which minimise great risk of greater harm. And they aim to support individuals to undertake practices that reduce harm and promote recovery in all other areas of physical and mental health and well-being. In Buckinghamshire, the one-bedroom houses are provided by Fairhive at the moment, and support's put in place by the YMCA. And we have a range of dedicated support workers, and they begin to engage with the clients as early as possible, because we found that as early as we can start that relationship, the better. It does mean that it is a really proactive and engaged relationship, and it means that there's a lot of trust built up, which is really positive. We've currently got 8 properties, and we've got 2 more going through the process. These are largely situated in Aylesbury and the surrounding area. For some people, we've found that they want to make a completely fresh start. For some people, we've found that they want to perhaps consider a rural area. They've struggled with being in a more of a town situation, but some people wish to be in an area where they can get to the shops, etc. So it really is quite individual with what we look at for them. We've got about 2 current referrals waiting for a panel, and 15 clients. This is just me going through the list. 15 that I can identify clearly as suitable for discussion in the panel. We've got funded support from the YMCA, but we have connection support, Wycombe Homeless Connection, Orb, AHAG, MEME, who we will bring in to support their clients through the panel process and to discuss them if need be. The clients are all former rough sleepers who've been verified by our outreach services and have been working with all the partnership agencies across the county. Usually that could mean Wycombe Homeless Connection and AHAG Connection Support, and probably ORB, while they're in emergency accommodation. The process is generally that a property is identified, relevant clients are reviewed by panel to check the needs and suitability. We usually hold a panel every month or whenever there's a need to review a property or to review a client. We discuss the cases, we have the people, their scenarios, why we think the referral is suitable for housing first, what their needs and difficulties are, and how they're working with services and engaging. Clients are supported every step of the way, from viewing the property, signing the tenancy, engaging with support services, benefits and physical and mental health providers. The Housing First support workers can discuss any issues they have with the neighbourhood managers quickly, as well as working with the tenants themselves to avoid it happening again. We tend to try and sort things out as quickly as we possibly can. So what that means is, if we see something happening, I think yesterday there was a little bit of a problem with one of our tenants, and we were quickly able to say, can the support workers engage? And we will have a meeting with Fair Hive just to make sure that we address it promptly and we do everything to maintain that tenancy and keep it going. So that means the long-term success rate of the tenancy is improved quite substantially. From somebody that quite regularly sits on antisocial behaviour meetings, you can see when things are going wrong quite early on. And part of the prevention aspect of this is to try and engage as quickly as possible so that people can get in touch with that client, try and see what steps they can take to engage, etc., etc. We've gained some funding from DLUC to support the decorating and furnishing of the properties so they can really belong to the prospective tenant. It's working really well. We've had some challenges. I mean, I remember ordering a sofa for somebody that we hadn't measured the doorway for, and so you can imagine what happened. That didn't quite work out, but we all learn from these slight challenges. It's been beneficial for them to be able to decorate themselves, both in terms of this as a housing pathway for the client group, and it enables the housing association to utilise probably properties that might be a little bit more difficult to rent. It also saves money in terms of addressing antisocial behaviour and any other issues, as we can identify things early on. So what's the impact been? We've had some really significant success stories for people who settled and managed to benefit from the support offered. We have at least 3 clients who've engaged with community projects. We've become recovery volunteers, become food bank ambassadors. We've had clients who've improved their health and well-being by being in settled accommodation and finding the space and the time to put aspects of their lives back together again. We've found that, particularly for one of our female clients, she's been able to re-engage with some things that she was missing. So she found herself not being able to take part in things such as animals and horses. So she's now engaged with a community farm. So there's been some really positive aspects for our clients. And I think that we've seen, certainly for some of them, really, really quick engagement with the support workers, really, really good integration within the community. It's not been without its challenges, because as you can imagine, with this particular client group, there are challenges. Most have been willing to engage with the support workers, but have found that process practically a little bit difficult sometimes. For one individual, maintaining the cleanliness of the space that they are in has been an issue. But he's beginning to show a lot more awareness, and he'll actually make contact and ask for support with this when he needs it, which is quite a move on for him. So they're, it's small steps and they're getting on really well. There's an issue with some ASB, I think, at the moment with one of them. But again, it's the ability for the support workers to engage promptly, quickly, and try and work with that client to address it. And that means the tenancy can continue. We have had an issue with finding enough housing providers to work across the locality. As I've said, we are mostly fixed in Aylesbury at the moment, and this is engaging with Fairhive, but we are talking to 3 other housing providers, registered providers, to see whether they would take part in the project. And I think I'm speaking to another tomorrow, so I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that we can stretch it further, because we do have clients across Bucks to the south who are waiting for this and will engage positively. So I'm hoping that we can get them to see both the positivity and practicality of this approach. So what's the future for Housing First? Showing the Department of Levelling Up the progress we've made, hoping to extend the funding further in the next round. That's certainly one aspect of this which I think we are looking forward to demonstrating, because it will show it's such a positive aspect of that. I would like to consider engaging with more partners, engaging with the project across Buckinghamshire, but there's also scope, I believe, to seeing how it could support other angles. So possibly couples, for example. We do have a particular issue with homeless couples. We've managed to get a particularly difficult couple into accommodation, encourage them to stay there with some really focused partnership working. And I think I'd like to see if there's a possibility of extending it so that we can look at working with couples and perhaps maybe looking at moving that forward. There's also the scope perhaps for a young people's housing first. There's a considerable impact there, and it would perhaps offer a viable long-term alternative for some of those clients as well. So that's not something I'd like to look at in the future. But that is a very brief introduction to Housing First. I hope that's been helpful and enlightening for all of you, and I'll take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emily. That's a whistle-stop tour through what is obviously a relatively innovative new model of working for local authorities. If anybody has questions for Emily, please put them in the chat and we'll pick them up at the end, either about the Housing First trial that's exists in Buckinghamshire at the moment, or indeed about other aspects of the council's housing and homelessness strategy. So great, thank you. So I'd love to move on to our next guest. So Anna and Emma Dewey are working at Youth Concern, which is a local charity that has stepped into the space of youth homelessness in quite a big way. So guys, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry. And thanks, Emily, as well. Yes, so I'm here with Emma, and Emma is going to help me answer any questions at the end, but I just have a few slides to take us through. And Dan, I think you're going to help me move the slides on as well, Daniel. So I'm Anna, and I've been a trustee at Youth Concern for over 5 years now, and we're an independent charity that has supported vulnerable and disadvantaged 13 to 25-year-olds in Aylesbury Vale for 45 years now. And obviously it's great to be here and have the opportunity to talk about the fabulous work that we do. If I could have the next slide, please, Daniel. So, you know, some people might be surprised to hear that, you know, there is deprivation in Buckinghamshire, in the lovely leafy home county of Buckinghamshire, but of course there is, as we've just heard from Emily as well. And there's a very real need in Aylesbury Vale, which is where we're based. And we experience the most deprivation of Buckinghamshire's 4 districts. So if I just throw a few stats at you, Aylesbury Vale is in the most deprived 20% of England's LSOAs, which is small areas and neighbourhoods. It also reports twice as many violent crimes, sexual assaults and drug crimes as the national average. And we also have almost twice the amount of antisocial behaviour. And most importantly for this webinar, from our own research, we know that there are 22% more homeless or at risk of homeless young people here in Aylesbury Vale than the national average. So, you know, quite shocking stats, quite a bleak place. But Youth Concern supports young people in 3 ways to help them. So next slide, please, Dan. So we do, like I said, we do three things. We have a drop-in centre, which is in the centre of Aylesbury. We have a counselling service, and we have 2 homelessness prevention projects. And through this sort of holistic service, we deliver benefits for about 1,000 vulnerable young people every year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's talk about the drop-in centre first. This is a sort of safe space for 13 to 25-year-olds. It's open 6 days a week. It's a place where young people could come to play table tennis and pool. They can use our music studio, which we have there. We provide hot food and food parcels, and they can attend programs, for example, sort of mixed martial arts, cooking initiatives, how to budget, how to write a CV, so on, things like that. And they can talk one-to-one or in small groups about the challenges that face them. And we also have visiting partners who come and use the drop-in centre to provide their own services. So that includes services on sexual health, substance misuse, independent living skills, benefits, help back into education, training and employment, and other such support services. And on average, we welcome about 124 young people to this drop-in centre every month. So it's quite a busy, fun place. Next slide, please. And then we have a counselling service, which again is for 13 to 25-year-olds. And that operates from our drop-in centre, but it also operates from other central Aylesbury locations. And we have a team of counsellors who can see up to 60 young people at any one time. And that counselling is done in person, and it can be done by phone and virtually as well. So we use various different sort of communication methods to deliver those counselling sessions. It's free, and young people receive on average 35 sessions of counselling. So that compares to CAM's offer of 6 sessions, and their eligibility criteria is being a suicide attempt. So and to access the CAM's counselling can take years to access that. So on average at Youth Concern, our young people wait around 14 weeks from referral to their first counselling session, or just 13 days from the time a counselling space becomes available. And it's a really sort of very well received and valued service that we offer, and very much in demand. And then next slide, please. And then the third way we support young people, and primarily the reason we're speaking to you today, is that we have 2 homelessness prevention projects. So we run Aylesbury Night Stop, and we've been running that since 2012. And since then, we've temporarily placed 150 18 to 25-year-olds who are in crisis in vetted and trained host homes. So Night Stop guests can stay for up to 28 nights in their host home, while the team works to find suitable longer-term accommodation and support for them. The thing is, of course, there aren't many places for a vulnerably housed or homelessness young person to move to. So rents in Aylesbury Vale, and as in many places, are high. Most young people can't afford to buy anywhere, and landlords would rather let to young professionals. So in December 2020, we opened our first supported accommodation project, The Next Step, which you can see pictured here. And here we're able to house 9 previously homeless young adults, and they can live with us at The Next Step for up to 18 months, supported by their project worker, learning how to live independently. And in the 3 years since we've opened, 21 young people have lived there, at that house. Next slide, please. So before I wrap up, I'd just like to set Youth Concern's homelessness work in a national context. Nationally, last year, 8% of all rough sleepers were under the age of 25, up from 5% the previous year, and that's an increase of 72% in a single year. And this count, which is a street count snapshot, underrepresents young people because rough sleeping young people tend to hide themselves away for fear of their safety when they're on the streets. And homelessness, of course, doesn't mean just rough sleeping. Many young people sofa surf, so 136,000 young people approached their local council last year because they were or were about to become homeless. Just 0.25% of the government's investment into homelessness was spent on youth homelessness. But youth homelessness has actually increased 12% since the last election. So youth concern and our sector is working harder than ever with a soaring demand and tightening resources. So what's to be done? Firstly, more holistic and joined up services between the voluntary sector and statutory services. Secondly, more services that move at young people's pace. So it can take 3 or 4 visits to our drop-in centre, for example, before a young person admits that they're sofa surfing. So before they can feel comfortable enough to talk to us about their situation. And thirdly, at a national level, because we're at Youth Concern, we're not afraid to raise our head above the parapet if it's in young people's interests. And we've joined 120 other homelessness organisations around the country to call for a national strategy to prevent youth homelessness. Next slide, please. Next slide, if you can. Thanks, Daniel. So it will cost Youth Concern just over £800,000 to deliver these 3 services this year. We don't receive any statutory funding and fundraise 88% of our income, largely from grant-making trusts. So we're enormously grateful to the Heart of Bucks for its support. Our holistic work enables vulnerably housed young people who may be seen as difficult, challenging or troublemakers to change what they and those around them may consider to be their inevitable life path. Funders that understand the importance of the early prevention work and fund projects like our drop-in centre and counselling services, as well as the Next Step project and Aylesbury Night Stop, can literally provide life-changing opportunities for vulnerable young people. And I thought I'd end with just a quote from one of those young people called Rashid. He stayed with us at the Next Step project, and he wrote to us. He said, saying, "It's been over a year since I was living at the Next Step project, but I just wanted to let you know that I've been working full time. I've got a flat and I no longer have a drinking issue. This all started with living with Youth Concern. I work in a care home now and spend my days reading, playing dominoes and card games and chatting to residents over coffee. I couldn't be happier. I'm starting a part-time course at the local college next term and my flat is lovely. Anyway, I just wanted to send something saying thanks for all the help last year. It completely turned my life around." So, I mean, obviously we love receiving letters and feedback like that. So thank you for listening, and then Emma and I will be happy to answer any questions at the end of this webinar. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. That was a fantastic journey through the work that you're doing and have embraced as part of Youth Concern. And I know the work that you're doing in Aylesbury and the surrounds is relatively new, I think, to Youth Concern over the last sort of few years, but is much needed. And I think there's a terrible growing demand, isn't there, for support for young people who are finding themselves at risk of homelessness or indeed housed insecurely in some way. So thank you for that. Sure. And our final speaker is James Boultbee, who's the co-CEO of both the largest 2 homelessness charities in Buckinghamshire, so AHAG and Aylesbury Homeless Action Group, and Wycombe Homes Connection. So James, the floor is yours to give us an overview of that homelessness picture in Buckinghamshire, please.
Thanks, Henry. Right, yes, no, I will talk a little bit about that. So yeah, as Henry says, I'm CEO at Wycombe Homeless Connection and Aylesbury Homeless Action Group, and a bit like Youth Concern, we're 2 independent local charities that raise funds to do what we do every year and have a variety of different projects. But let me start with a story, which I think might help illustrate it a little bit. We've changed names, obviously, just to protect people's privacy, but this story is about someone that we're calling Carl. And Carl broke up with his partner, and he managed to get some work just at the time when he was breaking up with his partner, actually, and it was work that had like a room that he could go and stay in as part of the job. But when he got there, he realised that the place that he was going to be staying was really not safe. There was people using drugs there. There was aggression, and he had some mental health issues and some physical health issues at the time, and so he actually quit that job that he'd gone to very, very quickly, and therefore had to leave the room that he'd got, and he went to stay in his car. And that's often what happens, really. It's probably a bit like what you or I might do if we suddenly became homeless. People don't tend to just go straight to sleeping on the streets in our town centres where we can see them, but try staying in the car. Trouble was, he was really unwell, and it was getting cold because it was coming up to Christmas. So he was getting really desperate. And like I think probably a lot of us have noticed, it can be quite difficult to get GP appointments, and he was just finding it even more difficult trying to organise all this from his car. So his ill health was getting worse. He was struggling to get access to the medication he needed. I think things were just getting really desperate. I've never tried to sleep outside for a night, and I think even trying to do it in the car in freezing cold would just be awful. And well, what the good news is, it was around that time that he found Aylesbury Homeless Action Group and got in touch with them. So what the team were able to do, first thing to say really, is that the support we offer is really tailored to the people that come in. We wouldn't say to Carl, right, this is what you get here. This is the offer. It's really is a case of our team saying, what would you like? What's your priority? What's important to you? And the first thing first, actually, really with him was to try and get his health issues sorted out. And one of our team is trained as an NHS care navigator, which apparently these exist because the NHS is so big and so complicated that you really have to actually train people to navigate around it. Anyway, she's fantastic and she does know her way around it, and she managed to get him emergency GP appointment, got him his medication, so we had that part sorted. But it was just coming up to Christmas, and he was really, really depressed, and we were really quite worried about what was going to happen to him. So what we have got is a little emergency fund. So we booked him into a hotel over Christmas, made sure he had some food parcels and things like that. And that was good. So that carried him through Christmas. And after Christmas, we managed to link him up with some slightly longer term form of temporary accommodation. We call them e-beds, but it's run by another one of our kind of partner organisations. And he managed to move into an e-bed where he was able to stay for longer than our very quick kind of emergency support. And during that time, he's managed to get a job, and he's hopefully on the way to finding something long term again. But stories like Carl's happen all around the country, and to some extent, people have always got into difficulties in life, whether it's relationships breaking down, getting into difficulties with drugs or alcohol, a mental health crisis. I'm sure the profile of these things has changed a little bit over the years, but there's always been crises in life. But homelessness is getting worse, and homelessness in Buckinghamshire is somewhat worse than the national average. So why would that be? The Buckinghamshire actually undertook the fourth highest number of homelessness assessments. So what that is where the council has to assess people to see if they've got a duty to house them. There's certain tests that have to be done, and if somebody meets those tests, then the council have a duty to put them straight into temporary accommodation, and then on to longer term accommodation, which is really good. But Buckinghamshire Council undertook the fourth highest number of those of any local council in the whole country, and that was in Q3 last year. we're also in the top 25% of local authorities for rough sleeper numbers. So, it's Bucks definitely does have some issues of deprivation. And when it comes to homelessness and rough sleeping, it's not really even just that we've got some pockets. We're actually up there with the areas where this is most serious. And giving the big picture, rough sleeping nationally is up 120% since 2010, when it began to be kind of measured in the same way every year. So it really is an issue that's getting worse. And the explanation as to why, although there's always been crises in life, why would that mean homelessness was going up and why is it worse here? It's really where the personal and the systematic collide. So relationships may break down, people may get drug and alcohol issues, people may get a mental health crisis, but why is it leading to homelessness? So going one level deeper, actually, not everybody is equally at risk of running into these same kinds of crises in life, and some people life can be a little bit more complicated than others. And there's a study that was done in 2017 that I think is really interesting and highlights why it's different for different people that have had different backgrounds. So there's enough stats nationally that you can look at the background of like hundreds of thousands of people that have become homeless over the years, and you can profile different people and different sort of demographics and characteristics and see who's really unlikely to become homeless, or what types of people are really unlikely to become homeless and which types are higher. So I'll just quickly read something out from this study, if that's all right. So it said, first, take a white male who had a relatively affluent childhood in the rural south of England, an unproblematic school career, went to university, graduated at 21, living with his parents at age 26, with no partner relationship and no children. So it's a bit of a picture of a type of person. That person's predicted possibility of homelessness before age 30 is just 0.6%. Very unlikely. But the second profile was a mixed ethnicity female who'd experienced some poverty as a child, was brought up by a lone parent, left school or college at 16, has had some spells of unemployment, living a renter, no partner, but does have some children. Her predicted probability of homelessness by age 30 was 71%. So, like, really likely, more likely than not, that person is going to experience homelessness before they're 30. So the issue really in Bucks is that when people face these crises and get into difficulties in life, it's trying to, you might have to, you lose a tenancy, you can't pay the rent, a relationship breaks down, you have to leave. It's kind of, the problem is, how do you get somewhere else? And there was a Right Move study last year in April that found that High Wycombe was the place in the country nationally where rents had risen proportionally the highest, and it was over 20% in 12 months. So rents are just shooting up. Not only that, I was talking to someone else who we collaborate with, who was telling me that he was speaking to local estate agents who say that for every tenancy that's advertised, and this was High Wycombe, but I think it's going to be similar for all of Bucks, they've got 100 people interested in every single tenancy that comes out. Now, apparently, the general practice is about 90 of them are just off the list straight away. They don't meet the affordability criteria. There are various things that landlords are not supposed to do to profile who they're considering for their tenancy and who they're not. And there's some practices that really are on the verge of what's okay and what's not. But sometimes it literally is just that 90 people out of the 100 can't afford it. And then you get the 10, and really they're done in order of who is the most attractive and the most promising tenant, which is all very natural. You know, of course, landlords want to take on a decent tenant and someone that can afford it. But it's actually got to the point now that people are being expected to have about 50 times the monthly rent as their annual income. So if you're looking at a very cheap one bed place, because one bed places tend to be more than this now, £1,000 a month, you want to be earning about 50 grand a year, if you're gonna be up near the top of the list to get that tenancy. So let's just, going back to Carl, how's he going to have a chance? Because he's got a bit of an interrupted work history. He's had to come on and off benefits. If he gets back into work, he was not in a position where he was going to be earning 50 grand anytime soon. So how does that work? So this is really the point where I say, hopefully, he's going to come to us for some help. And what will we do? Well, rewinding a little bit, the very first thing we're interested in doing, where possible, is preventing homelessness. So if we can catch people while they're still in a tenancy, having some difficulties, perhaps they've got an eviction notice and things are starting to go wrong, we love trying to prevent homelessness in the first place if we can. And we had a project last year where Wycombe Homeless Connection and Aylesbury Homeless Action Group were working together on this, and we managed to prevent 75 local households from becoming homeless. And these were households that were, you know, actively threatened with homelessness. And we worked out that it cost us about £1,500 per one that we prevented, and yet it costs between 20 and 30 grand a year for somebody to be homeless. And that's the extra pressure on the NHS. It's housing officers at the council, it's temporary accommodation, it's all the other services, and just costs the local economy. But you can prevent homelessness sometimes for around £1,500. So that's really why prevention's great, and you do that first if you possibly can. But some people, it can be difficult to prevent it, because we get, obviously, stories, you know, of people that come to us are often very complicated. Or sometimes people only really come to us when they're already homeless. So at that point, we're really interested then in reducing harm, keeping people safe. So safeguarding is a thing. That's why we put on some emergency accommodation, often particularly in the winter, trying to get people off the streets, and collaborating with the council that run a thing called the Severe Weather Emergency Protocol. But you know, basically it means if it's below zero, we can often work with them to get people into bed and breakfast. But we give out food, clothing, help people get access to medication, all manner of things like that. So it's all about saying homelessness is always going to be awful, but let's try to make sure that we're reducing the harm as much as we possibly can. And then the final thing is trying to get people resettled back into accommodation. So some of it is about these emergency accommodation options, where, like someone like Carl that we were getting really worried about, and it was cold and he was extremely depressed, and it was Christmas. So trying to get people straight off the streets where possible. But in terms of longer term, I suppose there's three main options really. There's getting people into private rented accommodation, which, as I said, is difficult, but we do have a few friendly landlords that we can work with. We have got a scheme in Wycombe called the Wycombe Rent Deposit Guarantee Scheme, which has got even more friendly landlords that they work with. We keep some emergency funds to help pay for people's rent in advance and their deposit, because that's another big hurdle. You're probably going to need about £2,000 just to move in. A lot of people haven't got it. But private rented accommodation is not right for everybody. It's not going to be affordable or sustainable for every person that we work with. Sometimes we're just helping people to get onto the social housing register for Buckinghamshire. So that we call that Bucks Home Choice here. You kind of you get essentially you get points, you get a kind of a grading, and you get to bid on properties. And if you're the kind of highest priority person bidding on that property, you get it. There is a very long queue. There's not enough social housing really there does need to be more, but that is a way to get some people housed. And then for others, it's actually looking at supported accommodation. So there's a few hostels around Buckinghamshire that we can look at with people to get them off the street. So that's kind of what we do. We are very much a community response to homelessness. So although we collaborate with the council and we collaborate very keenly with them and with other charities like Youth Concern and others, we are an independent charity that just raises this money from the community to do something where we think we've spotted an issue that could do with some extra response. And I think Buckinghamshire is a very generous county. We get a lot of support. We get donations. We get volunteering, and we've had some wonderful support from Heart of Bucks. And I know if you're interested in supporting us, hearing what I'm talking about, I know they'd be very happy to chat about that. And we try not to, a bit like Youth Concern again, we try not to leave it to just cleaning up the system's mess, which I suppose if you were being cynical, you might say, well, we're just sort of buzzing around trying to fix a systematic crisis. We need to be looking to the long term. How do we stop so many people being sort of spat out into homelessness? So we talk to politicians as well. We recently had a visit from a DWP minister, so an MP that's part of the government there. And we spoke to her about the level of local housing allowance, which is really out of whack with private rents, and it's just not enough to keep anyone housed. And the person that had been impacted, that one of our clients got to speak to her, which was great. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was visiting Parliament to speak to some of our local MPs, and really, actually, I was really trying to hammer that thing about preventing homelessness is cheaper and it's better, and it means people are harmed less. So just sort of hoping that the government will treat this as a big thing, and really actually hoping that all parties will make this a prominent thing in their manifestos, and commit to doing something about homelessness, whoever the next government is. So just winding down here, one quick last story before I finish. A lady came to Wycombe Homeless Connection named Mariam, and she'd suffered abuse from a partner, violent partner, and also she actually had a really stressful job, and it had all got too much, and she'd gone off work, and eventually it had led to her losing her job. She'd got into debt because her rent was way more than benefits were paying for, and just to try and live, really keep the lights on, keep eating, she'd started borrowing money off friends, off family members, but really getting to the point where things were spiraling. She was borrowing money from people, not having any idea how she was going to pay it back. And even then, she was starting to get into rent arrears. And eventually, she got an eviction notice through the door from the landlord. And she did what I think, actually, if we're being honest, a lot of us could be tempted to do when there's a problem. Because I think I can remember being younger and thinking I don't really want to look and see what my bank balance is, because it might be too far into the overdraft. That happens. You just sort of don't want to look when there's a problem. And she was doing that. She put her head in the sand and she avoided the landlord. She dodged his calls. She didn't respond to any of the letters. And by the time she came to Wycombe Homeless Connection, she was just a couple of days away from the point where she was been told that she was going to have to leave. So what we did, actually, in this case, not very much, so little, but it was crucial, because we offered her just support to chat it through and gave her really clear information about where she was at, what are her options, what are her responsibilities in the in the situation, and what were her rights. And it actually spurred her on enough to ring the landlord, try and rebuild that trust that had gone, really, when she dodged him for so long. She managed to negotiate a longer time period, and amazingly, actually, given how hard I've said it is to get an alternative property, she managed to use that time to move somewhere else, to another place where she could afford the bills, managed to stay on top of it. And she was really, really grateful, even though I felt we'd only done such a small thing, what people often say is it's the fact that I wasn't going through it on my own. Someone was there to talk about it. Someone was there to give advice. Someone was just there to have a chat. And it made all the difference. So, you know, it is a big issue, but we are making a difference. Wycombe Homeless Connection and AHAG and all the other organisations and the council working on trying to tackle this in Buckinghamshire. And that's me. Thanks, Henry.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. As always, a very open and knowledgeable tour through the situation of homelessness. Thank you very much for contributing. We're now going to move into a very brief Q&A to finish. If anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the chat for our guests, and I will repeat them back. Before we do that, I just want to say that Heart of Bucks has recently, I think we published it yesterday, written a deep dive into the situation of homelessness in Buckinghamshire. We have contributions in there from Youth Concern and from James at Aylesbury Homeless Action Group and Wycombe Homeless Connection. So it's a really, hopefully a useful sort of tour through the Buckinghamshire landscape in terms of housing and homelessness. And it really paints a picture for me of Buckinghamshire being quite unique in many respects, in having significant challenges when it comes to housing, generally housing insecurity, very high housing costs, very high rental costs, and mixing that in with rising levels of deprivation means that people living in a insecurely housed situation, and that could be sofa surfing, could be rough sleeping, it could be living with significant rent arrears and at risk of eviction, or just unable to move on with their life and being forced to live in a overcrowded accommodation because they can't find anywhere to live. That is a significant challenge for Buckinghamshire, and it's probably one of our most pressing issues as a wider community. So we will send around the link to that report, and I hope you will get a chance to have a look through it. So questions then. We've got one from D, working for Buckinghamshire Healthcare Trust. Oh no, sorry, that's not a question. That is some information. So have a look in the chat if you want to read about the clinic that they run that is dedicated to the homeless community. So thank you, Dee, for letting us know that, and we can circulate that to the guests as well. So I have a question to kick things off then for Emily. The Housing First model, really, obviously really interesting. It does sort of move people to the top of a list, if you like, in terms of how they're supported. How does that marry up with the council's housing waiting list? You've got 5,800 odd people waiting for social housing, which is obviously quite a big number. Housing First, as I understand it, would be giving priority to a certain group of people in some way, shape or form. How does that align in your view?
I see. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. This is an issue for Fairhive. They tend to separate off some properties which are more difficult to rent. Right. They're more difficult for them to rent on the housing register. We don't just get their brand spanking new, beautiful properties that they're building for the housing register. We would get some that are actually markedly more difficult or more tricky, and we have to some extent, work with our clients to try and see who would fit that property. And if people aren't suitable for that property for whatever reason, then we can't move them in because we're not setting people up to fail. But if this is for, I can see your point, but I think for these particular client group, we have no options for them. In some respect, we are looking for, they wouldn't be able to go through the housing register in the normal manner. In fact, some of them have already been through the housing register. So I think all we're doing is separating properties which aren't going to necessarily be rented and putting them to one side and seeing if we've got possible tenants from the former rough sleepers who don't normally get that much of an option. So I think it's just a method of separating people off. I know there's an enormous waiting list. It's not my department, but it is the council's current priority to try and reduce that waiting list. And I know there's I've certainly been on a lot of visits where there's new properties coming through but as always, these take time. So I think it's just a case of trying to build up what we've got in terms of viable properties for everybody, so that we've got across the board, we've got a consistent response to everyone that requires a house in Bucks.
Yeah, I think the housing first model does make a lot of sense, and it is probably more a stock issue, isn't it, than anything else in terms of just having the properties available. This is obviously not standard practice in the UK. You talked about getting a special grant from government to be able to do something which is relatively innovative, I think, and unique, and something that I think is top of everyone's list in terms of how we should deal with rough sleeping in particular. What are the chances of that being rolled out as sort of national practice, because it's not something that you hear huge amounts about outside of like the housing sector?
It's not. I mean, actually, it is run in a lot of different areas, but often that's the registered providers themselves have decided to run it. They may or may not have the council involvement at the start. So we do know of projects in Hertfordshire who run Housing First, but it's done from the start with the housing provider as the probably the application for funding, etc. So I think in Bucks it's slightly different because we put it into the Rough Sleepers initiative as a part of our package that we requested. I think I would love it to be rolled out nationally because it does work. It obviously, as I said in the presentation, it does have its challenges, but any housing for this group will have. And it's a lot better than sitting in the antisocial behaviour meetings and listening to evictions being discussed, when you know that had you put some of this support in earlier on, this could have been avoided. So I feel like it's definitely a positive working process for people, and to be honest, the majority it works very well for. So I would love to see it nationally. And I think all we can do is go back to the government when we apply for funding again and say, look, this is working. Please, can we have some more money? And this is the evidence and this is the backup, and see if we can get it more focused on what we need in the locality. Because at the minute it's very set on one area. We could do with it being right the way across Buckinghamshire, and we don't have enough registered providers engaged. And that's where I think we've got a challenge there to try and persuade people. That's all.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Thank you. So just coming very quickly to Emma and Anna, quite a big question for you from me is, I think young people are facing all sorts of incredible difficulties this day and age, and it only looks like it's getting worse. What is the solution for young people who are insecurely housed? And I know that's a massive question, but just in your general experience, what would help young people not be facing this? And we can talk about obviously building lots more houses and so on, but in the situation as it is now, what's the sort of number one thing that you would do to sort out the housing crisis for young people?
Massive question.
Hospital pass to both of you there, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different approaches that need to happen, but I think something that it's almost like we need to step back to, again, I think it's a common theme throughout, is about prevention rather than wait until they are turning up at Youth Concern or the council saying, I've been kicked out. And even though all our young people and referrals have got completely different circumstances of how they've become homeless, I think one of the common things is the parents and the families are some of the people that are turning up at AHAG, that are turning up at the council. It's the parents' situation where they've got overcrowding or homelessness, or they're fleeing domestic violence. They are the adults in that family are the ones that are facing eviction notices and all the other things that we've heard talk about. And when you've got an 18-year-old and a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, it's the 18-year-old that kind of gets elbowed out, and they're left in their own devices, no job, no nothing. Where do they possibly get housing from? So I think there needs to be work with the whole family, like whether that's through children's services, whether that's through the healthcare, and parents that have got severe sort of physical and mental health issues that simply can't cope with an 18-year-old that's perhaps had to be a carer or witnessed various other things. So I think it's a prevention work and dealing with the family as a whole and trying to stop it so that 18, what options does an 18-year-old have of getting housing? Literally with no job, zero. There just is zero options available to them, so they're just immediately homeless. So we kind of need to go back and work with the families and try and get that. And sometimes taking the 18-year-old out is the best thing. So kind of more supported housing as well, that's geared up for young people, because if you put them into supported housing with people up to the age of 55, you know, there's a risk they're even more vulnerable and can get dragged into other things. But yeah, it's a massive I don't know what the solution is, but there's lots of preventative work.
Well, that was a very good answer to a very difficult question, so thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. More accommodation for people in that transitional period of their life, so 18 to 25, that understands that people need more support during that period of time, for a variety of reasons, mostly because of, you know, largely life experience and just needing to learn some of the life skills to look after yourself and so on,
Yeah,
particularly if they're not being taught at home.
Just to quickly say as well, a lot of our 18-year-olds that are in college full time or are working in a minimum wage job don't actually want their own flat. They don't want housing by themselves. They I'm too young, I don't want that. So it's again finding this kind of what does that look like for those that are just very young and aren't looking to have their own tenancy and pay their own bills just yet.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So just to finish things, I'm conscious of time. James, in terms of the link between the charity sector and the statutory service provision, what's the number one thing in your mind that you think the statutory services could do to improve the situation? And I know you'll have a view on that, but what would it be that local authorities, the NHS, etc., could do to improve the plight of homeless people?
It's an interesting one. I think it may be slightly too broad for me to attempt to answer that on behalf of all different sort of streams of homeless people. But let's say if we were talking about the rough sleeping issue, because that's most visible, the most sort of critical. I suppose if I could have one thing, it would probably be having some way to connect people that were sleeping rough with the homelessness advisors at the council, with the services that the NHS provide, particularly things like mental health and things like that. It can be very difficult when people have suffered really complex trauma. They've got a lot of different barriers for them getting that help, to be told you have to phone this number, you have to go to this place, you have to go through a system. We find the more we can bring services to them and to places where they're comfortable, or even literally to them on the streets, and make it really, really user friendly, the better. I think services can fail when you've got sort of stressed out staff having to kind of funnel people through a set way that things have to be done, and then when the person is starting to get upset, agitated, or it's not working for some reason, the support can end up just getting cut. So I suppose it's getting that support out there and getting everybody trained up to that sort of trauma-informed approach, which we find works very well with people that have spent time on the street.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. People who have who are their life isn't typical anyway. They are atypical people probably, and therefore they probably need an atypical system to support them when they're experiencing a crisis. So one size fits all doesn't necessarily work for the statutory service side of things. But I totally understand why the council has significant financial pressures, and that can be a difficult thing to put in place. But as you rightly said, there's a significant cost to the local economy of people being homeless. So different ways of thinking might be helpful. I think that's a good place to leave it, unless we've got any final questions. I just want to say a massive thank you to our speakers for giving up their time, and indeed to our guests for listening. Thank you for taking part. And yeah, we really enjoy putting these webinars on, and hopefully bringing information to you in a slightly different format to just written text. I think it brings it to life a little bit. So a massive thank you to the council and Emily, Youth Concern, Anna and Emma, and James at Wycombe Homes Connection and AHAG. We will send out a link, and of course the report that we've just written. Thank you all for your time. Have a lovely Thursday.